Hello again, guys, it is I, Freeze700. We are back with some Kingdom Under Fire lore, this time Vellond, the military and the tactics of the military. Oh boy. So this one's going to be a little bit longer, so if you guys didn't know that by now, this could be easily a 20-minute video, if not longer. So just bear with me, there's a lot to talk about. So the Vellond military. It's a highly organized, almost modern-day composition when it comes to their armies. Each army is given its own slaves, its own regular troops, such as archers, and a few supporting contingents of horses, and sometimes wyverns. Now, what makes this almost modern is the fact that they're always organized. They never need to do what the humans have to do, which is rally up their men and get them all into formation. The Dark Elves never really have to do that. Everyone's always there, everyone's always on time, everyone's always ready to go. So this is a nice start. This is a great start to an army. Some armies are actually elite fighting forces though, and these ones are a little bit different as they're a lot smaller. They're usually consisting of highly elite Yenicharies, and the Yenicharies are easily able to fight off forces that other armies couldn't. So a normal Dark Elf infantry unit could not take on 2 humans at once. They would get probably hurt really badly or lose entirely. A Yenichary, though, is able to do this because they're an elite fighting force. We're going to talk more about them later on in this video. Now, the way the organization is done is so that any battle fought, the slaves will take the most damage. So in the tactics, we're going to cover this more about how the slaves are always going to be in the front line. They're always going to take a massive amount of casualties. But, followed by that, the Dark Elves will take a lot of casualties too. And then if shit's really bad, the horses and the support units will get wiped out. Now, unlike the human armies rely a lot more on their supporting units, whereas Vellond doesn't really require too much support. This is mostly due to the fact that the superiority of speed in magic is in all the Dark Elves. So, normally when a human army fights, they require magic infantry, they require paladins, they require mortars. This is all to cause damage and to provide support for their dudes. The Vellond army doesn't require this because all the Dark Elves are magicians. All the Dark Elves are super fast, so they're able to flank people without the need of horses most of the time. So because of this, they actually don't require as much preparation or as much support as other armies would. Like the Orc army would require a little bit of support with scorpions, mammoths, maybe their general, their chieftain to come out of nowhere. Dark Elves, you'll rarely see their general. You're most likely going to see just a lot of Dark Elves casting magic like Meteor. Now their gear. Let's talk about their gear for a bit, because this kind of helps you understand a little bit more about their tactics too before we dive into that. The Orcs are usually kept in whatever garb that they're wearing at the time that they were purchased or put into slavery. The Dark Elves, though, typically wear a large number of blades. Usually it's the rapier or the saber, and they always have a shield, which would be a kite shield. Now the weapon, the rapier, is designed to pierce armor, and to mix that with the Dark Elf's superior speed, what they do is they lunge at the enemy with their arm fully extended out, and this creates a thrust with so much momentum that's akin to almost a spear piercing someone's chest. This is really useful against the Knights, because the Knights, they wear a shit ton of armor, they're heavily defended. Dark Elves don't wear that much armor. So what about the other weapon, the saber? The sabers are curved blades, a lot like cutlasses, which the Dark Elves do have a cutlass, but they aren't really as commonly seen because cutlasses are more of a defensive item. It's used mostly for deflecting blades. And the saber, though, is a lot skinnier than a cutlass. So really what it's meant for is slashing. And this is also good for a Dark Elf because many times in the games we've seen it where a Dark Elf can get 2 slashes in before a human can even get a single hit off. And by doing this, this allows them to easily cut deep into someone's chest if they're wearing lighter armor, which the humans do. They usually wear chainmail or, well, just clothes, just leather armor. So this is really good for that. Now, chainmail is designed for the blocking of cutting, slashing, but the issue is that the saber is weighted. You can easily see it in the design, but there's actually a little bit of weight in the top. And whenever it's got weight, you know it can pierce. Now, the saber can also be used as a lunging thing like the rapier, but it's not the same effect. When a Dark Elf lunges with a rapier, it's usually just direct arrow, boom, penetrate your chest. When a Dark Elf lunges with the saber, it's more of they're going to lunge at you and then hook the saber upwards to hopefully get underneath that breastplate and stab you deep. Now the shield is a very highly valuable commodity. Out of all the weapons we're going to talk about in the gear, I would say the kite shield is the most valuable, because this is what is keeping the Dark Elves alive. Also, this is better than the human shield. I know, it's strange. So despite the humans having better technology and having full plate mail, they're not having better shields than the Dark Elves. This is mostly due to the fact that the shield that the Dark Elves have is very skinny. Now, being very skinny, you would think, well, what's the point of a kite shield? Aren't they supposed to be big, broad things? Well, they're supposed to be if you're a human. These are all women, and these are also Dark Elves. They're very skinny individuals. So despite how skinny the kite shield is, they're actually perfectly fit into these things. So whenever arrows come in, all they have to do is just simply angle their shoulders back, and boom, they perfectly fit into this kite shield. So now they're not going to get hit in the feet, they're not going to get hit in the shoulder, they're perfectly protected. This is why I would say the kite shield is the most highest valued commodity in all of the war gear we're going to talk about. Now, the Dark Elves don't really wear a lot of armor, and the main reason for this is that when they wear a lot of armor, it hampers their advantages, which is their speed and their maneuverability. So when it comes to armor, they usually don't wear any, and if they do wear some, it's usually just stuff to protect the neck, the head, the feet, and the arms, and that's it. Sometimes you'll see some who have like glittering scale armor for their breasts. That's usually pretty pointless. Most of the time they'll just wear some scales to cover their chest, like their heart, and that's it. They won't cover much as far as like their whole chest, like their stomach and stuff. They usually don't cover that much. Now as for the horses are actually very unique. The horses don't really wear that much armor. It's mostly just gems. Again, very ornamental stuff. Now, the horses though, I actually think are better than the human horses because they're faster. But also, if you look at the design of the horses as I display here, this horse is very beefy. Now, when you see a beefy horse like this, you immediately think, okay, this is clearly a war horse, or this is just a fucking big one. Well, a war horse is very different from a regular horse. The humans seem to be using more farming horses, more just running horses. The Vellond army, though, is using war horses. And the difference between a war horse is that they may not be as fast as a countryside horse, but although in the gameplay, the Dark Elf horse is way faster. I think that's a minor critique, though, is that it shouldn't be faster, it should actually be slower. But regardless of the technicalities and the science behind this, the war horse is actually nastier. And they even talk about this in the game, about how the horses are dying of boredom. And when they say that, they're being very literal. See, war horses are very nasty horses. They're the types of horses that will bite you, except these ones will actively seek out to bite you. This is noted a lot of times in Spanish conquistadors in their travels, about how their war horses are really fucking vicious. So not only do you have to fight the user on top of the horse who's slashing and cutting you or whatever, but now you got the horse who's actively kicking you and trying to bite you in the shoulder, in the face, whatever. And it may not, kill you, but it definitely is gonna break your bones, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna fucking suck. Especially since this is a beefier horse, not just your average run-of-the-mill thin one. Now by looking at the Dark Elf gear, you can kind of start to see something that's a bit of a pattern. It's actually a similarity across all the gears that you've seen so far, except for the orcs, which is that it's highly decorated, it's highly ornamental. Now, what is the significance of that? Well, the Dark Elves are mostly women. So the jewels and the designs of the armor could just be them just being women. They like to look good, they like to look fabulous, they like to look beautiful. But I think this actually reflects more on the culture of Vellond itself, not per se that they're women. Much of the labors in Vellond are done by the men and the slaves. So that means that the women and the vampires are going to be in a bit of a higher elevation of status. And when you're in a higher elevation of status, you dress better, you look better, you have better gear. So because of this, the women seem to dress themselves luxuriously with weapons and armor that almost seem more decorative than they are useful in battle. But there is actual use to it because, again, it's not cutting off their belly, their thighs, so they're able to move fast and look good at the same time. Now, looking good at the same time, you may think, well, what's the importance of that? Well, you have to remember is that a lot of the medieval battles and stuff in real-time history were done by pretty much men to teenagers. So when you got this hormonal group of men and they're fighting a group of beautiful, stunning women, do you really think they're gonna do the final blow and kill them? No. This is where the Dark Elves definitely will use their trickery at their disposal. They may be down on the ground, battered and bruised, and you're about to kill them, but they're like begging for their life, and you just hold on that one last second, which is long enough for her to execute your life by picking up her rapier and thrusting it through your chest. But it's also that the Vellond army seems to be inspired by the Ottoman Empire a lot. Again, Janissary versus Janissary, they sound very similar, and the structure seems to be a very similar thing as well. So due to this, you can kind of see the similarities between the two. Janissaries were highly ornamental. They would always cover their flintlocks in gold and inscribe into it. They would always wear nice flashy colors that would be very like orange or giant like blue like shirts. I was gonna say tunics, but yeah, same thing, shirts, tunics. And by doing so, it would actually make them very noticeable for the European armies to see them from a long distance. Vellond is a lot different though. Their society is a little bit darker. Their society is built upon slavery. So they wear much darker colors like silver and gems, which would be something like jade or obsidian, something that's very dark and very menacing that shows their authority. Now the military tactics, we're going to get into it now. Most of the Vellond military tactics involve the use of support units as a last resort, not as the initiator. We see this many times with the humans where they'll start with catapults and mortars and cavalry charging at the enemy. This is an attempt to kind of break their lines or weaken them for their infantry. Vellond, on the other hand, will not do this. They will instead resort with military infantry up front center, slaves too, and using their supporting magics, not their supporting units, but their supporting magics, which would be their archers casting the magic. And also many of their battles will involve trickery, which forces the enemy to utilize adaptable structures. Now, if you don't have an adaptable front line or adaptable structure to your army, you will get cut off and you will get hampered really badly against Vellond. As most of their battles, they will force the enemy to lose their support units early into the fight. And Vellond hasn't even brought their support units yet, and you already lost yours. Or they will make it where they will go around the back and wipe out your mortars, and only your mortars. Well, what are you going to do now? Now you don't have that. So it forces you to be on your toes and to be adaptable. Get used to losing something that might be vital in your army, and make up for it with something different. And as stated earlier, the elves are magical, so expect a shit ton of magic. Just meteors rain down the sky, lightning bolts, vines ripping through the fucking ground and strangling your men. This is the shit that the Dark Elves will be using a lot of. So let's get into the specific tactics that you might actually see, and let's draw up some diagrams to show you. Alrighty, so the standard template for any sort of army composition or any sort of setup that the Vellond army will use is usually something like this. Whether it's 1 infantry or 2 infantry, always expect double the number of support units. Now those support units will be the circles, and the circles could be a lot of things actually. It could be horses, it could be archers, it could also just be other infantry, but the other infantry would be strictly dedicated to supporting roles, like protecting the archers while the other infantry is engaged, or casting spells that maybe the archers don't know how to cast. So you could have it where the Dark Elf archers, they know how to cast this Tree of Healing. Every Dark Elf knows how to. That's a good healing spell. But they don't know how to cast fire magic. And maybe what you're fighting against is weak to fire. The archers may know instead how to cast vine magic, which is how to poison the enemy with dangerous vines. This is why you would need multiple support units. After all, you can damage the enemy in more than one way. So this is typically the prototype of it. I'm not going to get into the whole slave usage because that's a little bit more advanced. It's more of a Dark Legion tactic, which is Dark Legion is both Hexter and Vellond combining their arms. This is Vellond specifically. I know I said they use a lot of slaves, but when I was starting to think about it and do all this battle tactics, I was like, that's way too complicated of a battle strategy for us to really be doing. That's more of a Dark Legion rather than Vellond itself. So let's focus strictly on Vellond, just Dark Elves, how they deal with it. So with this army composition, this template in mind, here's a standard lineup that you would probably see. 3 infantry, 4 infantry, maybe 6. But no matter what it is, you'd always expect to see more support units. So if there's 6 infantry, you could see 8 or 10 supporting units. And those supporting units, as I said, could be just another infantry unit that's only dedicated to magic. It could also be an archer. It can also be cavalry. It can also be wyverns. It could be a lot of things. So for simplicity, I'm just going to assume that these are just archers. It's easier to describe, it's easier to go through it, and it's easier for you guys to understand. Purple blocks is infantry, purple dots is supporting units. So, in a standard lineup, what you would see is you would see the infantry is engaged. Now, when the infantry is engaged, the supporting units can help in 2 ways. They can do these little shitty purple trees I've drawn here, and these little trees is the Tree of Healing. And the Tree of Healing is a super powerful healing spell, but it is a slow healing spell. The humans have Curatio, and Curatio is an instant heal. A large flash of light and boom, your cuts are disappeared, they're gone. The Tree of Healing, on the other hand, is more like Wolverine healing. So it will heal them, but there is a chance that they could die in the process of the healing, because it's a little slower. So the wound will slowly seal up. That's the kind of shit you're going to be looking at. So that's one way that the supporting units can support, is through healing magic. And by doing that, it actually makes the Dark Elves tankier than the Orcs, if it came to an Orc versus Dark Elf scenario. Because again, if the Dark Elves are being healed constantly and constantly and constantly, and also you can actually stack the Tree of Healing, you can actually put multiple Trees of Healing on one unit, and they'll be almost instantaneous healing. So they can actually out-tank a lot of people in a lot of scenarios, and that gives the archers more time to kill you. Now, the other way the supporting units can support is through magic. Now, I've drawn 3 different spells here. The giant orange circle is a meteor, because that's one famous way of doing it. The green star is vines, so vines just sprout out of the ground and cut you or strangle your dudes and poison everybody. And then the big circle is just a blizzard. They can do ice magic. So these are just some of the ways. They can also do a magic that I didn't show here, but curse magic. So what they can do is summon the dark mist. And the dark mist makes it where, 1, you can't see shit, but also it negates your armor. Without your armor, you're pretty useless to those arrows. And also, they're so fast and they're just cutting you down. Meanwhile, you can't see what is in front of your face. So that curse magic can be very powerful. But there's also one other spell, silence. Silence is in not shut up Freezer 700, stop talking. No, I mean silence is in you can't cast magic. All of a sudden, your ability to cast magic is muted for a temporary, short period of time. So there are ways that the Dark Legion can deal with this. So again, there is destructive capabilities of supporting, and then there's the supporting aspects of supporting. Now, when it comes to scenarios, I had to think of a few of them in the top of my head. So this is scenario 1. There's a few infantry and a few supporting units. Again, the human armies are never going to out-support the Dark Elf compositions, but they can definitely have a lot of mortars, a lot of catapults, stuff that would hurt and be a lot more noticeable than a bunch of archers. So the infantry engages, the battle's going, but something odd will happen. This scenario is what I like to call the charge through. So what the Dark Elves can do to deal with your supporting units is to actually charge through your front line. So what they'll do is they'll engage you, but then they'll keep running past you and go straight to your support unit. Now this scenario is actually a little risky, because that means that they're putting their support units in danger. But as I've said before, if one of your support units is just magical infantry, then they can assume the role of infantry and tank the front line that now you just walked past. So that way your support units can be saved from further damage. But at the same time, this battle tactic also leaves the enemy in disarray. As I said before, the main strength of the Vellond army is that they're adaptable. They're like a modern army. They can adjust and fluctuate between their roles. The human army is very stiff. It's very stubborn in its roles. So if you go in and rush past the infantry and go straight to what's supporting them, which could be their paladins, their archers, their mortars, their infantry is pretty fucking helpless and really useless. And the fact that your army is adaptable enough to make it where you can have it where your infantry is no longer your infantry. They're no longer going to be your front line. Instead, they're going to be your killers. They're going to be the ones who go in and kill the support. Meanwhile, your supporting guy, who was originally just going to cast spells all day and just sit on his ass, is now all of a sudden picking up his shield and his sword and holding off the enemy while you do your job. This is the whole reason why I say Vellond's structure is adaptable. They can adjust to whatever it is they need to do. Again, there is some risk to this battle tactic, but I've seen it more than enough times where the Dark Legion will literally just rush right past you and just go straight to your support units and fuck you over. So if you really, really value your mortars, you're gonna get screwed in this tactic. So now let's go on to the next tactic. Scenario number 2. This is what I like to call the decoy. So what can happen in this scenario is simple. Normal lineup as you would see before. 3 infantry, 3 infantry, they're supporting units, you are supporting units. And all of a sudden one of them rushes ahead. Now this one that rushes ahead could actually be the main attack force. So instead of 1 infantry block, I could have drawn a whole army just charging in at your army. And then that wouldn't really get the point though, because we see this more in the campaign than not, where 1 infantry, like Commander Rumens, will engage the whole attack force. And what will happen is the 1 infantry block that went ahead of the army will actually try to run around and gather all the infantry on them. Now for the humans, this seems like a great win, because that means, hey, you know, we can pick off some of their infantry and leave them more vulnerable. So of course they'll engage this 1 infantry. But really what's going to happen is the supporting units are not going to support them. Instead, the infantry and the supporting units are going to go around and wrap around your support line and cut you off. And by doing this, you're now helpless. Again, your infantry will be without support, and now they're attacking you from the rear instead of from the front. This, of course, has its risk, as I said before. Like, what if the infantry is too tough and they end up destroying the infantry that you sent as a decoy? Well, that's why I said this scenario could play in one of 2 ways. It could either be a small-scale battle like this, or it could be a big battle, in which case we could see it in the Battle of Raven Meadow, where it's a huge enemy front line that comes rushing at the humans, and the humans think, oh, this is the main fighting force. All of a sudden, Dark Elf Knights are behind their archers and mortars and are rushing in to attack them from the rear. Just out of nowhere, out of the tree line, they just come out of nowhere. So this is kind of the tactics that you as a human would have to be aware of that the Vellond army uses. Never is it going to be straightforward. Never is it going to be upfront and honorable. These are not the strengths of the Dark Elves. The Dark Elf strength is their speed and their trickery. Never, ever would you expect them to just charge head on. If they do, something is wrong. This is like the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park. If they're so blatantly obvious right in front of your face, it's a trap. There's something wrong with that picture. So let's go on to the next thing, the castles. What would a normal castle siege look like? So here we go, the castle. We're going to assume that this is just a normal human castle, so most of the defenders are actually going to be outside the walls, not in. So with this scenario, you're going to have the same setup. Human infantry with supporting units. These supporting units could be catapults, archers, paladins, even magic users. Well, the Vellond army is obviously going to try to outnumber them. Never do the Dark Elves want to be outnumbered, but if they are, then that would probably be the Yenicharies you're fighting. And the Yenicharies, I honestly am going to do another video about them, about their own battle tactics, their own lore, because I feel like they're too different to really be classified in this scenario. So you have the normal matchup. As I said, a lot of infantry, a lot of support units. Now, the infantry and the support units aren't going to be the same that the humans would be dealing with. So one Dark Elf Knight is easily going to get toe-to-toe with the human knights, but it's going to be a different kind of toe-to-toe. The human knight can easily overpower and take more damage than a Dark Elf Knight. So because of that, the Dark Elf Knights have to be more plentiful if they want to stand an equal chance. Also, since the Vellond army doesn't have mortars and catapults, they have to make up for it by using more archers than what the humans could use. So, again, this is why this scenario would make sense to see in a lore perspective. So the lines engage, but the engagement's not going to be the typical way you would see it. Like, you already can see it already, Freezer 700. What happened to the middle? The bottom and the north, the bottom and the top engaged, but the middle stayed the same. They didn't move at all. Why is that? This is part of the grand scheme of Vellond. They're putting pressure on the defenders. What's going to happen here is that since they outnumber and they're overpowering the two flanks, the left and the right, the top and the bottom, the north and the south, by overpowering these flanks, they're leaving the center untouched. And the reason why they're doing this is that it makes it vulnerable. The humans understand that if they move their center, if they go to support either side, they're leaving their center wide open. And leaving your center wide open is the worst thing you can do, tactically speaking. Because then the enemy could just rush right on through, attack your support units, or they could just flank you around and just screw your infantry over quicker. So this kind of puts it in a game of hide and seek, a game of cat and mouse. Whose center is gonna budge first? If the Dark Legion is starting to, the Vellond army, if the Vellond flanks are starting to falter, they're encountering more resistance than normal, yeah, their center can go in and aid them. But in a typical fashion, if they were well prepared, if they were smart enough, I don't want to say elite, but if they were smart enough to know what they were doing, which they typically do, then they'll actually overpower the flanks. And now what's going to happen is, because the center doesn't want to move, they don't want to risk leaving their center open, now they're surrounded. Now their supporting units on the flanks are getting annihilated too. And then, that's it. C'est la vie, the castle is yours. Now the center is being swarmed and engaged on all sides by infantry, supporting units, archers, cavalry, everything. And this is all because of the grand scheme of Vellond. Besides that, this is pretty much it for the diagrams. This is kind of just me talking a little bit, but the whole thing with the Vellond army that I love the most is that it's all about intellectual capacity. So never are they ever going to outright charge in and knock you on your ass. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to put pressure on points that you never really thought of. They're going to put you in mind traps that you didn't really think about. They're going to challenge the infrastructure of your mind, and they're going to challenge the infrastructure of your command. They're going to attack stuff that you never thought about really defending. This is the point of their army. Now, when it comes to war doctrines, that's totally different. Usually what they do in the war doctrines, like the bigger scales of war, they very rarely engage. They usually raid settlements, raid mines. They usually sack and steal a lot of shit from people, because the reason being is that, again, they're trying to put pressure on points that you never really thought about. And by hurting you in ways that would leave you vulnerable should you react. This is the whole point of the Vellond army, and this is why I love them so much. They actually fight clever. Even though they don't believe in technology, even though they do not agree with humans on their reliance on plate armor and mortars and gunpowder and using all these weird doodah equipment like bomber wings, they do make up for it, though, with cunning strategies that would be almost impossible to guess what they're gonna do. Besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I hope you guys enjoyed, and maybe you guys will now appreciate Vellond and go, wow, those Dark Elves are fucking scary when they really put their minds to it. Like, really fucking scary. And we haven't even talked about their elite units yet, the Yanicharies. So, besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I'm out. See you guys next time.